Good evening, class. My name is Javon Parker. Tonight, we will be discussing the Dred Scott decision, which is regarded as one of the most controversial events leading up to the Civil War in America. The plot: a slave by the name of Dred Scott claimed that he and his wife should be granted their freedom because they had lived in Illinois and the Wisconsin Territory for 4 years, where slavery was illegal. As a class, we will track the development of this case from the proceedings to the ruling. As it was uncommon for the lives of slaves to be documented, very little is known about Dred Scott other than the infamous case and his family makeup. Historians are still trying to piece together bits and pieces to truly understand the man behind this infamous case. As I mentioned earlier, Dred Scott was a slave born in Virginia. His owner, Peter Blow, moved to Alabama in 1818, taking his 6 slaves along to work a farm near Huntsville. In 1830, Blow gave up farming and settled in St. Louis, Missouri, where he sold Scott to U.S. Army surgeon Dr. John Emerson. After purchasing Scott, Emerson took him to Fort Armstrong in Illinois. A free state, Illinois had been free as a territory under the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 and had prohibited slavery in its constitution in 1819 when it was admitted as a state. In 1836, Emerson moved with Scott from Illinois to Fort Snelling in the Wisconsin Territory in what has become the state of Minnesota. Slavery in the Wisconsin Territory was prohibited by the United States Congress on the Missouri Compromise. During his stay at Fort Snelling, Scott married Harriet Robinson in a civil ceremony by Harriet's owner, Major Lawrence Teleferro, an Indian agent. The ceremony would have been unnecessary had Dred Scott been a slave, as slave marriages had no recognition in the law. In 1837, the Army ordered Emerson to Jefferson Barracks military post south of St. Louis, Missouri. Emerson left Scott and his wife at Fort Snelling, where he leased their services out for profit. By hiring Scott in a free state, Emerson was effectively bringing the institution of slavery into a free state, which was a direct violation of the Missouri Compromise, the Northwest Ordinance, and the Wisconsin Enabling Act. Before the end of the year, the Army reassigned Emerson to Fort Jessup in Louisiana, where Emerson married Eliza Irene Sanford in February 1838. Emerson sent for Scott and Harriet, who proceeded to Louisiana to serve their master and wife. While en route to Louisiana, Scott's daughter Eliza was born on a steamboat underway on the Mississippi River between Illinois and what would become Iowa. Because Eliza was born in a free state, she was technically born as a free person under both federal and state laws. Upon entering Louisiana, the Scots could have sued for their freedom, but did not. The Scots would have most likely been granted their freedom by a Louisiana court, as it has respected laws of free states that slaveholders forfeited their rights to slaves if they brought them in for extended periods, and this has generally been the case for about 20 years. Today, toward the end of 1838, the Army reassigned Emerson to Fort Snelling. By 1840, Emerson's wife Irene returned to St. Louis with their slaves, while Dr. Emerson served in the Seminole War. We're going to go back to Missouri. While in St. Louis, she hired them out. In 1842, Emerson left the Army. After he died in the Iowa Territory in 1843, his widow, Irene, inherited his estate, including the Scots. For 3 years after John Emerson's death, she continued to lease out the Scots as hired slaves. In 1846, Scott attempted to purchase his and his family's freedom, but Irene Emerson refused, prompting Scott to resort to legal recourse. Roger B. Taney was an influential figure in the overall ruling in the Dred Scott decision. I would also like to mention that he was a slave owner, which also played a crucial role in the overall ruling of the Dred Scott decision. As I mentioned earlier, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney was an influential figure in the overall ruling of the Dred Scott case. During the deliberation process, he made some very heinous claims. One, that Negroes, enslaved or free, were not citizens of the United States, and Dred Scott being a Negro, and therefore, according to Taney, not a citizen of the United States, had no right to sue in federal court. Now, the reason why this was so controversial was because of the fact that blacks were citizens in many states, and because they were citizens, had access to the federal courts. Taney stuck by his claim and backed it up with John C. Calhoun's argument about the Fifth Amendment, which prohibited taking of property without due process of law. Southern citizens used slavery as their main business of labor. And because of that, they viewed slaves as property. And according to the law of the Fifth Amendment, you cannot take someone's property. So when Dred Scott, according to Taney, was being transported by his owners, he was moving across the United States as property and not as a citizen. So, ordinances and provisions such as the Northwest Ordinance and the Missouri Compromise, which prohibited slavery and the movement of slaves into a free territory, were now unconstitutional. According to the text, 7 of the 9 justices agreed with Justice Taney in the fact that African Americans were not citizens and could not claim citizenship, and because they were not citizens, did not possess the legal standing to bring suit in a federal court. Slaves were seen as private property, and Congress did not have the power to regulate slavery in the territories and could not revoke a slave owner's right based on where he lived. This decision nullified the essence of the Missouri Compromise, the Wisconsin Enabling Act, and the Northwest Ordinance, 1787. Overall, the Dred Scott decision increased tensions between pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions in both North and South, further pushing the country toward the brinks of civil war. Ultimately, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution would settle the issue of black citizenship via Section 1 of the amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state